Hi, and welcome to OotiniCast. This is a special episode for the 500th episode of OotiniCast, and we've got an interview with Keith Kanneg, executive producer, and Eric Musco, game director of SWTOR. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Howdy.
Congrats on 500.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a long time. We were originally doing it weekly. Now it's been bi-weekly for a long time. That's why the math is so weird on that. And so if you wonder why we got to 500 at this point, that's how that happened. And of course, I've got with me my co-host Kitty Kisses. Hey, Kitty.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hey, and this is, I think, a good time to thank Jackie, the senior community manager, for helping put this together, and we really appreciate all she's been done. You guys have all been really busy right now, especially since there's a test server going on.
Right.
Been crazy on your end, I understand, and so we really thank you for your time here. So we could actually, I'd like to sort of start with a little bit of where the game is now, and maybe talk a little bit about the future as well, sort of make that the theme. So right now, in addition to the test server, we can talk about that too, if you like, but you're also working on the Mac client, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. So if you could tell us a little bit about the process of, how did you decide to take that from an idea to an actual effort, and what are some of the difficulties and challenges involved in doing something like this?
You want me to go?
Yeah, do you want to start with kind of how that happened?
Yeah, well, think back a bit. We redid our launcher, right? We went from the old technology stuff, to the new one. We dropped it from, I think it was 18 hours to download down to 20 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on your ISP speed. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea of that was to bring in the new tech, right? We've got the Steam launcher out there. It's pretty quick, but it's still on old tech. And we were starting to look into that, and we're in the process now of upgrading that particular launcher.
Nice.
And the engineer who's been working on it said, right, I could do this for the Mac too, because he owned one, right?
Right.
And brought to me and showed me what he had already done, right?
Oh, wow.
Because people have been using the Mac in a long time, but they have to go through this whole sequence of events in order to get it to work.
Right.
And what he thought is he could bring that all together under the launcher, make it so it could work, and then all you have to do is download the launcher and the same game would work.
Wow.
I said, that sounds really interesting. Could you really pull that off, right?
Yeah.
And sure enough, I almost said sure as shit. But
Yeah.
Right? But sure enough, right? I know. I said it anyways. Right. Well, he did that. We even went to Apple and made sure that we got certified and did all the right steps to make it so that we could actually release it.
Wow.
So we're now in beta testing of that, right? We have a couple things that we need to adjust, right? But overall, they're looking pretty really good, right? So we're actually going to be releasing on the Mac sometime soon.
Yeah,
right?
so it's one of those really
cool.
It's one of those rare cases, because this really does not happen very often, where someone's like, I kind of can do this.
Yeah.
I just can do it. And someone goes up to Keith and is like, hey, I kind of already did it.
Right. That's amazing.
It's kind of already there. And so then we go through the whole process of let's take it back to scratch. Let's kind of check all the boxes. And there was obviously still a bit of work to do, but yeah, we're able to.
So am I understanding that there's not that much you have to do to sort of get the game to be recognized and play under the Apple iOS?
It works now. So you look at it and see it's the same game, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea it was like that.
Yeah, it runs under an emulator, right? And what he did is he packaged up all the things that were necessary, all the calls, made the adjustments in the way that it interacts with the Mac, so that the performance is there. I'm sure there's tweaks and things that we can do along the way that will enhance performance. But that's one of the reasons for the beta test. We got all kinds of great feedback. Made some slight adjustments, but overall,
that is cool.
From what he put together to what we have ready to go, he wasn't that much changes that he had to do. So we're pretty impressed by what he put together, right?
Yeah, that's really cool.
He may not want to be named, right? So
fair enough. That's incredible. I had no idea that that the emulators were that good that nowadays, and you could just kind of do that. And my Mac knowledge is very ancient at this point because I had friends who were doing it in college and stuff like that. And we're running emulators for Windows and so on in the 90s and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's amazing that that it works that well. That I'm so excited.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And we might be simplifying it because we're not engineers. So someone might be listening to this screaming at the camera right now. But
right.
From our it is for me.
From our leadership perspective, it was
right.
It's rarely that simple that it goes kind of that smoothly, but we were able to go from kind of prototype to execution quickly, which usually doesn't happen.
Exactly. Like, are you sort of, how about like on the marketing end, are you sort of like running to catch up and figure out what you're going to do with the marketing for this, or?
No, I mean, that's kind of when I say we kind of go back to, when I say we kind of have a prototype and then we kind of go back to the beginning, it's kind of that, right? Like we weren't necessarily planning to do a Mac launcher in that way. And then this kind of popped up and Keith was like, I still remember when Keith mentioned it to me when I had a meeting with him. He's like, hey, what if I told you we could launch on Mac? And I was like, what are you talking about? And so then he kind of walked me through it, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. So we kind of, we get everybody together, and then we kind of go through what our normal kind of go-to-marketing plans are. And so we kind of start getting that usual comms and marketing plan together. So we already we know how to do all of that stuff from everything else that we do. And we have game updates and kind of all of those things. And so that's kind of, par for the course on all the normal things that we do. So that was
Is the PTS done for the Mac client?
It's I don't know, actually. It's in progress right now.
Yeah, it's
cool.
It's in progress. We're probably more wrapping it up, right? We've got, like I said, we got a few things that we need to tweak. We'll go back to those players that were having those issues, make sure that the changes that we made still work good. When we actually chose everybody, we looked at the lowest common denominator for the configurations, right? 8 gigabytes of memory, things like that. What's the worst case possible, all the way up to the people that are using the newest operating system.
Sure.
And so we had a lot of people sign up to do this. So that's
awesome.
That's encouraging
Nice.
too.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
The more the merrier.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see, right? I'm hoping that really we can make some announcements here shortly. Right, but until I know exactly what we're doing on those other 2 issues that we have that we're working on, can't really make an announcement.
Right.
But from a marketing standpoint, we're not going to make anything that's really, other than maybe there'll be a press release and it may be something along those lines.
Okay.
But I think in this case, we'll get it up on the website. We'll do some, right? Somebody just left us.
That's right.
Left us. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
He'll probably be back.
And we'll get something up on the website and we'll communicate it that way that it's now available, right?
Okay.
For download, right?
Right. And I was going to ask, but it seems like because of the way this actually all came together, it kind of surprised me. But maybe this answer will surprise me as well. So are there any other like platforms or any other places that you might want to move SWTOR, like Xbox, PS5 sort of thing?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, right? So I mean, do we want to go to other platforms? I mean, of course, I would like to be on every platform that's ever been invented. I'll go on Super Nintendo if we can. We'll go everywhere. And I mean, like, we've always done exploration. So I can give you a past example, even though I know you're asking future. Like when we went to Steam as an example, like we were actively exploring going to Epic at the same time, kind of thing. Sometimes going to other platforms is surprisingly not that hard. Other times they are monumental amounts of effort, like going to console, right? Like if we were to go to console as an example, as you might imagine, we would need to have controller support, redo massive amounts of, things under the hood, our UI, the way our combat functions, right? Like, not to say it would never happen or that we wouldn't do it, but that's a very, very different delta in the amount of work that would be required versus something else. So, I mean, do we want to do it? Again, I would love to be in every region and on every platform possible. So always the things that we're always exploring. I think the joke we always have made before is like, we see the responses to every social post and everything we make everywhere that just says console when ?
Right.
We know.
Yeah. And there's been a lot going on with SWTOR, like little changes under the hood and stuff. I know you did a post recently, Keith, about the DirectX 12. You're still working on that. So like lots of things that will still make the game sort of like function better, be easier to develop behind the scenes in the future. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
I'd probably like to say a lot of things.
Right, right.
One thing I can tell you, I know you asked Keith that, but one thing I can say, like,
Sure.
because it's something even Keith talked about, right? Like, as an example, the launcher, right? So like when we made the changes to the launcher, Keith talked about like, oh, downloading the client in 20 minutes versus 18 hours.
Right.
I cannot express to you how much of an improvement that was in our ability to develop the game, right? Like, I mean, we develop across like a fair number of development branches internally. It's not just like one development branch.
Right.
And so when I need to go do a playtest, or someone that's forget about me, I don't build the game. Someone that's developing across multiple branches, when they go to download the game, or we have, our QA department going to test something, their ability to download the game in an hour or 10 minutes versus, oh, I need to do a playtest tomorrow. Let me start downloading now because I need to do it tomorrow.
Right.
It's dramatic improvements for stuff like that. So
plus the iterations, we do lots of iterations in depth, right? And if it takes a day to download or 12 hours to download, right, then you're always 2 or 3 days behind.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
So the launcher got updated on the dev side, and now you can do that in 10, 15, 30 minutes, right? Depending while you're doing other things,
right?
Not just buying up the machine.
And so that's just one example. So, I mean, I think there's lots of things where a lot of people will see, and very importantly, because the way that we can express changes that we make to how this is valuable to all of you, the players, is critically important, because otherwise, you're the consumer. So it's important to show how that has value to you. But all these things have immense value to us on the development side as well, which is really important to both sides of the equation.
But to answer your question about DX12, right, there's a fundamental difference between DX9 and DX12. So we have a lot of changes to make on the way that you approach it, and the way that you handle your graphics, the way you handle your animations.
Okay.
And so we have to be pretty diligent about what we're doing and how we're going about doing it, because we do have a game. It's 13 years old. So how do you make it so that you can use new technology while still making sure that the game functions, and you have to go back and regress the entire game and make sure you didn't leave out a tree someplace, right? But part of those changes, we're talking about modernization. We've been doing that for a long time. You're seeing a lot of that type of change happening throughout the game, right? And we'll continue that effort, right? And as technology is integrated into the game or into the foundation of the game, we'll make those announcements too. And so that just sets us up to do more things. And Musco mentioned about being on other platforms. You can't move onto the other platforms without having this stuff already done, right? So you start thinking about what we're putting in as an infrastructure and underlying features, and we're building on top of that. And once all that stuff is done, guess what we can do, right? So at least we have. Wrong word. It's not a plan. It's
no, but I mean, it sets a roadmap, right? Like
that's probably a better word.
It's two birds with one stone, right? Like whether we end up there or not is irrelevant. It's still beneficial to do it regardless because of all the other benefits we get.
Right.
Cool. Yeah.
And now, in terms of like what's being developed now and what's going to be developing potentially in the future, so we're in the middle of a public test server right now. Mike Guild ran last Friday, so this is the more difficult, the basically impossible version of the boss. It was fun to see the mechanics and some of the new graphics and like the canisters that were filling up on the walls and some of the fun things. I like the new spot in Ilum. And I guess you were saying that at one point that the Ilum there's gonna be some general Ilum graphical updates. Is that right? As part of this?
Yeah, there's definitely some. We'll talk a lot. So I know Keith had alluded to art modernization. That's kind of a theme of ours that's coming as we go forward. We're a 13-year-old game. I mean, I think 7.5 was maybe the first time that we really hammered it home, right, with Hutta and the Mimbusa district.
Yeah.
But we've been doing this for multiple patches. We're going to start talking to you and showing you a lot more about it in these patches, and 7.6 is no different.
I appreciate that. And then you're going to have a dev stream here in the next few weeks, it sounded like.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be coming real soon. Yeah.
Great. Okay. One thing I was just thinking about the other day, and that's you recently added the Dantooine Spring Abundance Festival, and with that there's 4 seasons in the Earth year anyway, and now there's one event for every season. Does that mean that like the event calendar is pretty full now and you're going to be looking at doing other things, like maybe more of the ventures like Bessie, for that sort of for sort of repeating or ongoing content? Or is there another event that you'd like to add maybe? And like, you can talk in general if you can't talk specifically.
No, that's a good question. So I'll kind of address yours directly and then also kind of indirectly. So
Please.
If you look at it from strictly a goal perspective, the one thing that is important to us is just to make sure that when you are in the game, there's always something for you to do. And so from the Dantooine Spring Abundance Festival specifically was addressing a specific gap in our schedule, which was we have seasonal recurring events, and there was a season without a recurring event. And so we needed to fill that gap in our schedule. But if you kind of like take a zoom back, and I'll take a zoom back to look at like this guy right here, like this type of player, which logs in like every single day, and is playing constantly, you need to find a way to ensure that there's constant content happening. And so if you look across our game, we have, just with recurring content alone, we now have recurring quarterly seasonal events. We have monthly recurring events that happen. We have effectively now quarterly seasonal other events, because you have PvP seasons happening twice a year. You have galactic seasons happening twice a year. And that's just recurring content that you can look at on a cadence.
Conquest.
And that's not even counting the stuff that's happening in game all of the time. Conquest
is every week.
Rotating weekly. You have dailies, weeklies, all that stuff, right? And so that's just all of the things that are keeping you busy all of the time. And so that's really what our focus was with the Dantooine Abundance Festival, was just making sure that we filled that gap in the things that are going on a cadence that you can expect, right? So we want you, if you're the player that is playing every day, all of the time, there's some expectation of consistency that you can expect to know what's going to be there. And then beyond that, we want to layer some things on top of it, of things for you to meta progress, or things for you to be able to engage with on a broader perspective. And that's where things like ventures come in. Dynamic encounters will fill in a little bit of this as well, which will just be things in the world, things that are going on for you to work on over time, earn cool rewards, and that kind of stuff. Because obviously the venture is not something you can do quickly. It's something that's going to take quite a few weeks. And we look at ventures as it's a new system. So Bessie was a venture, and so we could add a new venture. And if we did add a new venture, it very likely wouldn't be a new companion to unlock. Like, that's not what it would be. It would be entirely something else that would also be in that style of like long-term thing. So if we did something with events, it's possible we would add a new event, but it more likely we would do things like update rewards on existing events. We would lean into events like the last Galactic season. We leaned into Bounty Contract Week as a part of the Galactic season. DVL stuff, right? So I think a lot of it is kind of, now that we've kind of set that framework of consistency and recurring stuff across the game, it's really just about refreshing those and keeping those exciting for players like Keith, and probably yourselves, that either have everything, are already doing those all the time, or for players that come into the game to go, what is all of this stuff? There is a million reputations to grind and all this content to play and stuff. Some of it to be overwhelming, but also just to understand the breadth of content that's there.
At the same time, making sure that all of it works together, right? So like, I think it's conquest and activities you're doing on this, but you can get currency for something else, right?
That's
and
right.
So
because
you're always doing something that will benefit you and in any part of the game, right? So and I look at it and say, that's, for me, I'm going in, I'm playing a lot, but I'm doing that for that particular reason. I'm doing that for my guild, but I'm doing this, right? And guess what? From the same activity that I'm doing, I'm benefiting all three of those.
Okay, so in your view, both of you, of course, what does a really good version of, say, the next 2 years look like?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I feel like I've done this on a bunch of the questions, but before we go back forward, let me take you back a little bit. I'm kind of just setting
Put the hat on.
Maybe I think another version. Because I think something that's important for the future is kind of some of the framework that we've worked on establishing in the last couple years. Something that was really important to us is our roadmap, right? Because I think really what you're asking is like, what's the roadmap look like? And we didn't talk about this. Like, this is one of the things that I remember having a conversation with Jackie of like, where Jackie's like, we should talk about this, and I'm like, no, let's not talk talk about it. Let's just do it, and then we'll talk about it later. Which is the framework of our roadmap. Because one of the things that was really important to us was consistency in our production schedule and consistency in our delivery schedule.
Yes.
And so you can probably tell me what content you could expect in our .1 updates and our numbered updates.
And yes.
Right.
And exactly when you could expect them, roughly within a few weeks of when those would come within a given time frame. So you could probably tell me what our production schedule looks like for the next year, and roughly what the content is going to be in those beyond like surprise features like dynamic encounters and things that you wouldn't know exist.
Right.
And so that was really important to us to establish over time, because it allows us to get really efficient in the things that we're building, and better at building those things quicker and better and bigger over time.
Yeah, make sure we're scoped properly.
And scoping properly and all that stuff. And so we've gotten there. Like I think we've really nailed that in really well. So now that we've done that, now we're kind of moving on to what we can do to kind of start rounding that up. And so some of the things that I think when we look at the calendar, ways where we can break that mold to try to set it apart. And obviously we're not going to announce anything crazy, but like things that are on the calendar that would allow us opportunities where we could do that would be celebrations next year. And that would be a good place. Obviously, we tell our stories in sagas but that's just a generic term I've said, but however you want, episodically, right? Okay. And so we're in the Legacy of the Sith storyline. And so
we need to wrap that up.
At some point that'll wrap up and we'll move on to whatever story is that comes after that. So that would be something else that we'd be looking to do at some point. And then our 15-year anniversary is the next milestone that we'd be looking towards as well. So those are kind of, and that's within 2 years, right? That's 2 years from a month from now.
Yeah.
Man.
Actually, for almost to the day would be early access.
Wow.
From the recording of this anyway. So so those are kind of the things that we would look at. And then again, now that we have the mold, which I think is really important, because it's not that we didn't really have the mold, but I don't think it was really as defined as we have it.
It was more sporadic.
It was a lot more sporadic.
Yeah.
And so the great thing is, I think it's really important to have the rules and have the box so we can break it, right? Get the rules, get them defined so that there's a really clear expectation for all of you. Again, because it's been nice that people started to figure this out. Like I've seen comments on the forums and comments on Reddit where people are like, oh, it's, 751. And then people are like, oh, it's a galactic season and some date nights. And people are like, correct.
Right.
What's in it? And it's like, all right, people are starting to put the pieces together of like what's in these releases. And so that's what our schedule will look like until it isn't. Right. And we do something different. And then that becomes exciting, right? When we suddenly go, hey, just kidding, hard right turn. Here's what this other stuff is. And that's kind of what it looks like for us, I think.
That's great. One thing you brought up, like how like we're in the Legacy of the Sith era. Right now, it's been a long time since we've been able to jump forward in the story. We can go to Osis, and there's a lot of story after that. So like people who like want to get their characters to like the latest content, like have a lot of story to go through, which is great, of course, for me, but for people who like maybe they've seen it and they're just wanting to jump ahead. It sounded like maybe you wanted to wait till the end of the Legacy of the Sith storyline and then jump ahead again, maybe? Or would that never happen? Do you know?
Yeah, we've talked about. So I remember when we went into 7.0, because it's the thing that's tricky is it is built into character create, like where that jump happens. And so the thing is that path is where things get a little bit divergent. Now, to be fair, we have had conversations about should we just update that jump? Instead of taking you to Osis, should it just take you to 7.0 instead? Right. And so we could do that. It's just tricky because it's like, is it weird if you if you don't have the context of what happened between Onslaught and Legacy? Is a little bit weird. So, but we've almost pulled that trigger a couple times. So anyone hearing my voice, please give us your feedback on where, if you would like us to move it, because I don't think we would give you both options. That gets a little bit trickier. Outside of us doing some gross stuff, if a designer hears me, they're gonna punch me when they hear this, but outside of like putting the legacy mission on like a terminal so you can just skip to it, which is something we should never do because that terminal is real gross. I can't say real enough in front of that. So outside of giving you a way to skip outside of that, it kind of gets a little messy. But we've talked about doing that because we know that it's a lot of content to play through for players when they're just like, just get me to the end.
Is that what your question is? Is how do you get to the end, right?
Right. Because
Going through all the story.
there's many times where you can jump ahead to the beginning of coffee, jumping into beginning of what is it called? I always call it the Trader's Trilogy. Anyway, the actual name always skips me because I use my own fake name. But anyway, and then you could jump ahead to Osa's, but then it kind of stopped. So, and you could do McCabe's, a couple of others as well. But but it has been a long time. Like even as a like a pretty diehard alcoholic who's constantly making new characters, I have a few mains who I have taken all the way through the story and are still like current. And then like every other character I make is like, at some point it's like, no, I can't get through all the story on them.
I will admit to you, right, that every character that I create, right, starts at the beginning and it goes through all the content, right?
Nice.
So I don't skip any of them. And the reason is because there's always something nuance or something that I missed, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so
That's
I
true.
have a group of characters that I do that with. Now there's other characters that, that I just, they're playing around and doing other things, but they're not part of my requisite of moving them through the story. Because every story, even the nuances that we put in some of those things, pertains to a different type of character, right? We don't do it all the time, but every once in a while there is. And so I choose to do those, 12, 15 times and do what you're saying. But I tell you what, I find all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they go, oh, we didn't know that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah, I still make choices that I've never seen before. Like every time I see the story, even the old class story that I've done many times on every class, I absolutely see conversation turns that I had not seen before.
Right.
It's amazing.
And if it's something that I hadn't seen before, usually someone on chat's like, "Oh, I've never seen that before." I'm like, and that's why I play through it all the time.
Right,
There's always something new to see. It's always cool to get a different, perspective depending on what choices you're making. It's great.
Great.
It's great.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk Wishlist. Is there something?
There was a second part of your question that I thought you had asked, but maybe not. Right.
No, I think we covered it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so Wishlist. Is there something you would like to add to the game, even if it's not really feasible?
Oh man. Okay.
I look crazy.
Oh god. Yeah. Okay. There's a wall of crazy right now. There's not. It's a white wall. I have to disclaimer before we answer this question.
Absolutely.
Two things. So, feasible is an interesting thing when it comes to game development because I think, first off, pretty much everything is feasible. Most things are feasible. It's just a question of resources and time, right? Like we could do almost anything if we had infinite resources and infinite time. And then I think I will couch for anybody listening to this that anything that comes out of his mouth especially that isn't real. No, anything that we say is we're probably just going to say random stuff for fun. Doesn't mean it's anything that's actually on a roadmap, right? Because that's what you're asking, right? Like, what's the crazy stuff that we would like to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Hypothetical, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I literally have my own wall of crazy, right? And they say it crazy because I asked some of those things that like we don't have that kind of resource to get that done. But to your question, is it feasible? Well, I don't think that's a question that we need to concern ourselves with. Is that something we really want to do? Yeah. If it is, how do we go about making that happen? Right. And if we can make it happen, is it within a reasonable time frame? Right. And if so, what else are we going to give up if we're going to do those things? Yeah. Right. So we always do the prioritization thing. So there's a lot of stuff that we've talked about in Kickground. So we'll tell you what our thoughts are, but these are just our opinions. Okay?
Right.
Because until we get the team together, we're not going to actually do that. But there's all kinds of stuff that I think we could talk about. Yeah. I'm trying to think of one thing that comes to mind that everybody would love me to say, right? But,
It's so dangerous, right? Because, obviously, given our titles, you would assume anything that we
Right.
say, like even like I can tell you my joke. I say half joke. Like the funny thing is, like we used to a long time ago where we would do like just like wide open brainstorms of just like anyone throw anything at the sticky board and just like anything you'd want in the game. And we always had running jokes of things like two things that would appear on the wall every single time because we knew someone was going to put them on,
Right.
which was just great, right? And one of them I would always put on the list as well, but the two that would always go up there was pod racing and Pazak. Those were the two that would always
Right.
and
Those are
I would
great.
always put a little check mark next to Pazak because if I was home right now, you would see like my background is just like I have a calyx full of board games and card games. Like I love playing card games. So many card games at home. I've spent too much money in my life on collectible card games. Like when I played KOTOR, I probably spent more hours playing Pazak than I did playing KOTOR. So personally, I love Pazak. So
Nice.
That would be
Yeah.
my thing that's not a thing that I would always put on the dream board list.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of KOTOR, old KOTOR players like Bailey who would love Pazak as well.
Yeah, the Pazak. And and to be
okay.
funny, I will tell you, we actually had one of those funny meetings, and that's how the swoop event happened. We had that meeting,
Right.
and then we
Because
came
it's
out
like,
of it.
why not? Yeah.
Yeah, and our one of our design directors was like, "What if I built that though?" We're like, "What are you talking about?"
But
And
what
they're
if we
like,
did? Yeah.
What if we did it? Like, what if it wasn't like PvP racing, but what if it was just like this kind of? And we're like, go on. Yeah, that's how Swoop ended up in the
That's
game. So kind of
awesome.
to Keith's question, right? Like it's like every now and again someone says something that's kind of just like, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if we did this thing that we never did? And someone was like, well, but wait a second though, what if we did it though? The boulder rolls into reality sometimes.
Right.
Right.
But one for me, right, is my grandkids play the game every once in a while, right? But I watch them on the keyboard and the mouse, it drives them nuts, right? But then I go see them play on the PlayStation or Xbox, and they're amazing with the controller,
Right.
I know that people have gotten the controller working with our game, right?
Right.
But it's not designed for a controller, right?
Right.
But one of those crazy, and whether it's feasible or not things, I would love to have a controller, right, added real native functionality on it so that it feels right, it looks good, right, it does all the right crazy things. But how do you take 32 options of I literally go through a whole bunch of keys in order to kill a boss, right?
Yeah.
And I enjoy that part of our game, right? I don't want it
exactly.
simple and press this 3 button 3 times. That drives
Right,
me nuts.
exactly. I agree with that. Yeah, I remember when 7.0 launched, and there was some simplification. Like you can't have all the choices that you used to have. Like some of them became like choices on the tree, and so you couldn't have all 3 of the abilities that you would have had before. Blah blah blah. So it did simplify a fair bit, and maybe you can talk about this, but at the time, like there was some speculation that maybe you were trying to make it more controller friendly, or port it to the Xbox or something.
It wasn't because of controllers that we were doing that. We're actually doing it because it got a skill bloat, right? Ability bloat,
Okay.
right? And it was like, there's some things that were very similar together, and then you had to click you had to do this in certain timing. It's like, this is driving us nuts, right? And then if you wanted to add anything, now there's no room to add it, right? So some of that was just cleaning it up and making it so that the redundant things were now incorporated together. Things that were similar got eliminated, and then made you do some choices from that skill tree.
And at the time too, at 7.0, so we had seen a lot of feedback, and I know the people that will be listening to this will be in our very, very hardcore players, so they will not understand this. But we had done a lot of feedback more broadly because we were expecting we were doing a CG trailer, right? And so we were expecting to see an influx of new players. And one of the things that we knew is that, like, especially because of the ability bloat, that our classes were very, very intimidating to play because of like some classes having like 38 abilities or something. And it's like, especially if you were like a free to play player, you literally could not even fit them on your there was a couple of classes that when we did an audit, you literally couldn't even fit them on your bar.
Right.
Even playing through your class story, By the time you got to 50, you couldn't even fit all your abilities on your bar or something crazy.
Right.
I know this was a few years ago, so I'm trying to remember. And so that was also some of the motivation, is just like we had seen that we had seen quite a bit of feedback from players coming through that were not super experienced with our game, that we had gotten to the point with bloat and stuff that it was like, there's a lot of things that overlap or do very similar things, to Keith's point, where it's like, we could probably just make these a choice, right? Like this does something similar to this.
Right.
And then obviously once we got it on PTS and got some feedback, it's like, maybe we cut some deep in this place and kind of had to make some adjustments. But
Yeah.
That was ultimately.
Something I do like about the skill trees is I really love it. There's a lot of them like this, where it's like there's a choice, and sometimes it's like a flavor choice, like, you know, do you want to be more mobile, or do you want to hit harder, or do more dot damage or whatever. I also like it when there's a choice between, like, there's one that's sort of clearly like PvP oriented, there's one that's maybe more end game oriented, and one that's more like solo, you know, like reset on kill, which is like almost exclusively like a solo experience sort of thing. And so you can, and it sort of makes sense that it's like, okay, you know, you can kind of lock into that. It's like, okay, I can actually use these choices to make a solo experience, and then but then when I'm going to PvP, I'll swap over, get my PvP abilities going, and then when I have operation, I can do it yet again. And and that part I really did like about the new skill tree, and also just, I love when a skill tree choice or a tactical or an implant changes how you play the spec. I love that. Like,
that's fun.
Nothing is more fun to me than like realizing, oh, if I make this choice, all of a sudden that ability like gets used way more frequently, like more interestingly, and this other ability doesn't get used as much, but maybe that's interesting too. I love that sort of thing. Like, I'm not a big healer, but if I'm going to heal, I love being a sage healer and then taking the choice so that I can do damage and then have the damage bounce and do healing. And because it makes it so much, that's a really fun mechanic for me. So so I'm an
offensive healer, right? And I play PvP totally different than I do when I do raids.
Yeah.
Right. So I made all the reflect stuff, and then I can flash bang, I can jump out, and, and I'm just irritating, is what I am, right? So it's good to be a healer in PvP, where you can be in this stealthy, right? Yet you can be a pain in the butt, right? So
right.
I enjoy that a lot. Right. So
well, I really appreciate that. I appreciate everything, and thank you for your time. We really love what you do. You know, we love SWTOR. Kitty, any last minute things that you'd like to say, or?
No, just again, thank you guys for taking the time to come and talking with us. It's very appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you guys. And congrats again on 500.
Thank you so much.
Congrats on 500.
Bye, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.